One bullet, a century of destruction. June 28, 1914, 9 a.m., Sarajevo, Bosnia. The sky was clear. The sun blazed overhead, and the city carried the kind of silence that exists only before a storm, when disaster is approaching, yet no one knows it.
The stone streets of Sarajevo were packed with people that morning. Colorful flags fluttered in the air. Austrian military bands filled the streets with music. Crowds had gathered to catch a glimpse of their ruler. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was visiting the city for the first time, accompanied by his wife, Sophie. They traveled openly, with little fear and very little protection. But there were people who weren't afraid. There were people who had been waiting. In one of the city's narrow streets, outside a small shop, stood a 19-year-old boy. His name was Gavrilo Princip. He was so small that he disappeared into the crowd, yet behind his quiet face burned a fire that neither hunger nor sleepless nights could extinguish. Hidden beneath his coat was an FN Model 1910 pistol, and inside his mind, only one thought echoed. Today will be written into history, whether I live to see it or not. This wasn't just the story of one man. It was the story of an entire world that would never be the same after this single morning. But to understand what happened, we have to go much further back. Berlin. The great powers of Europe gathered around a table and handed Bosnia over to Austria-Hungary, as if they were selling a piece of land. As if the people living there didn't matter. As if their voices, their suffering, and their blood were completely irrelevant. The Serbian people were devastated. But broken people rarely remain silent. Sometimes they form movements. Sometimes they meet in the shadows. And sometimes they seek revenge. In 1911, inside a dimly lit room in Belgrade, a man founded a secret organization called Ujedinjenje ili Smrt, Union or Death. The world would come to know it by another name, the Black Hand. Its mastermind was Colonel Dragutin Dmitrievich, better known as Opus. He was the head of Serbian military intelligence, a man whose hands shaped decisions and whose heart burned with only one goal: to free Serbia and crush Austria, no matter how much blood had to be spilled. People understood the kind of man Opus was the moment they looked into his eyes. Small, cold, calculating, almost reptilian. A cigarette was almost always between his fingers. His voice rarely rose above a whisper, but his plans were always deadly. When he learned that Franz Ferdinand would visit Sarajevo, traveling openly with minimal security, he uttered only a few words. "This is our chance." Gavrilo Princip wasn't officially a member of the Black Hand. He belonged to another revolutionary movement, known as Young Bosnia. It was a group of passionate, idealistic, and desperate young men. They read the works of Nietzsche. They dreamed of a united South Slav state. And they believed that the death of one man could set an entire nation free. Princip was suffering from tuberculosis. His lungs were slowly failing. He knew his life would not be long. Perhaps that was why he no longer feared death. Fear exists only when you have something left to lose. Princip had only an idea. And that idea was enough to die for. And to kill for. In Belgrade, he learned how to fire a pistol. He learned how to throw bombs. Then, together with 5 companions, he slipped into Sarajevo by different routes, moving quietly, unnoticed. The city looked peaceful on the surface, but beneath that calm
poison was spreading. The plan itself was simple. Franz Ferdinand's convoy would travel along Apple Quay, Sarajevo's main riverside road. The conspirators would stand at different points along the route, a chain of assassins. If one failed, the next would try. If the second failed, the third would act. There was no escape plan, only one mission. June 28, 1914, 10:10 a.m. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie rode in an open-top Groff and Stift automobile. With them was Count Franz von Harrach, convinced he was protecting the Archduke. What he didn't realize was that the greatest danger wasn't hidden. It was standing in plain sight. As the motorcade rolled along Apple Quay, the first assassin made his move. His name was Nedelko Chabrinovich. He pulled out a bomb and hurled it toward Franz Ferdinand's car. The explosive struck the folded roof of the vehicle, bounced off, and landed beneath the car behind it. A massive explosion ripped through the street. The blast echoed across Sarajevo. People screamed. Shrapnel tore into bystanders. Blood stained the cobblestones. But Franz Ferdinand survived. So did Sophie. Chabrinovich immediately swallowed a cyanide capsule and jumped into the Miljacka River, hoping to take his own life before he could be captured. Neither plan worked. The river was too shallow. The poison was old and ineffective. It only made him vomit. Within moments, he was arrested. Alive, broken, alone. Despite the attack, Franz Ferdinand insisted on continuing his visit. He decided to visit the wounded at the hospital. The drivers were instructed to take a new route. But somewhere along the way, a fatal mistake was made. One of the drivers followed the original route instead. The convoy turned toward Latin Bridge. History was about to change. At that very moment, Gavrilo Princip was standing outside Schiller's Delicatessen. He was exhausted, disappointed. He believed the mission had failed. He had heard the explosion. The Archduke had survived. Some of the conspirators had fled. Others had been arrested. He thought it was over. He was alone. The pistol was still inside his coat, and his mind had gone almost numb. Then, in a single instant, everything changed. Franz Ferdinand's car stopped directly in front of him. The driver had taken a wrong turn. As he tried to reverse, the engine stalled. The car stood motionless, barely 5 feet away. Princip stepped forward. He drew his pistol and fired 2 shots. The first bullet struck Sophie in the abdomen. The second pierced Franz Ferdinand's neck. Silence fell over the car. Count von Harrach watched in disbelief. The Archduke remained sitting upright, his eyes still open. But something in his face revealed the truth. He was already dying. Sophie collapsed first, falling into her husband's lap. According to later accounts, Franz Ferdinand cried out, So Farrell, don't die! Stay alive for our children!" They were the desperate words of a dying husband. Within an hour, both Franz Ferdinand and Sophie were dead. Gavrilo Princip was captured on the spot. He too tried to swallow cyanide. It failed. An angry crowd surrounded him. Police officers dragged him away. He did not scream. He did not cry. His eyes remained exactly the same. Cold, determined, and burning with conviction. During interrogation, Austrian officials asked him a simple question. Why did you do it? Princip answered calmly, I did it for the freedom of my people. I believe I did nothing wrong. He could not be sentenced to death.
Under Austrian law, he was still under 20 years old and legally considered too young for execution. Instead, he received 20 years in prison.
He was sent to Theresienstadt prison, where the damp, harsh conditions worsened the tuberculosis that had already been destroying his lungs. On April 28, 1918, at just 23 years old, Gavrilo Princip died alone inside his prison cell. He never truly understood what his actions had unleashed. The fire he had ignited had already spread far beyond Sarajevo. It was consuming the entire world. When news of the assassination reached Vienna, the first reaction was silence. Then came anger. Then something far more dangerous. A cold, calculated determination that only an empire could possess. The leaders of Austria-Hungary convinced themselves that Serbia was responsible. There was no conclusive proof. The Black Hand operated in the shadows. Many of its secrets died with its members. But Austria wasn't looking for certainty. It was looking for a reason. And now, it believed it had one. One of the bloodiest days in British military history. July 1st, 1916. The opening day of the Battle of the Somme. In a single day, the British Army suffered 57,470 casualties. One day. Yet despite the unimaginable sacrifice, almost nothing changed. The front line barely moved. No decisive breakthrough was achieved. From June 28, 1914, to July 28, 1914, only 30 days passed. Just 30 days. And in those 30 days, the greatest domino effect in modern history began. Austria-Hungary delivered an ultimatum to Serbia, giving it just 48 hours to respond. The demands were so severe that no truly sovereign nation could fully accept them. Serbia agreed to most of the conditions, but rejected one crucial demand. That single refusal was all Austria-Hungary needed. July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. And then, the dominoes began to fall. Russia declared its support for Serbia. Germany stood beside Austria-Hungary. France backed Russia. When Germany invaded Belgium, Britain entered the war. Soon, the Ottoman Empire joined. Italy followed later. One by one, nations were pulled into the conflict until nearly the entire world was divided into two opposing camps. One pistol, two bullets, a distance of barely 5 feet, and a chain of events that would eventually claim the lives of around 20 million people. On the Western Front, humanity witnessed horrors unlike anything it had ever seen. Across the fields of France and Belgium, soldiers dug endless networks of trenches that stretched for miles. Inside those trenches stood British soldiers, French soldiers, Australian soldiers, and Indian soldiers as well. Men from the Lahore Division and the Meerut Division fought thousands of miles from home, on battlefields whose names many of them had never heard before. These trenches were far more than lines carved into the earth. They became some of the most dangerous places on Earth. The ground was soaked with mud. Rats grew so large they gnawed through soldiers' boots. Disease spread rapidly. Then came poison gas. First chlorine, then mustard gas, and the bodies of soldiers who had fallen there. Many corpses remained where they lay for weeks or even months. Recovering them often meant certain death. Miles away from the front, generals sat safely inside headquarters, studying maps. They issued orders that sent thousands of young men into battle. 10,000 today.
15,000 tomorrow. 20,000 the day after. As if they were moving pieces across a chessboard, instead of sending human beings toward almost certain death.